Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Camellia was having what she generously categorized as a mediocre day, which in the cargo hauling business meant nobody had shot at her yet, and the coffee dispenser was only mostly broken. The weather vane hummed through the outer reach sectors like a tired bee, all dents and patches, and the kind of character that made insurance adjusters weep into their clipboards. "Distress beacon," Wren announced, the ship's AI managing to sound both bored and judgmental simultaneously. A talent Camellia had long suspected was programmed specifically to annoy her. "Broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Looks like a research vessel, but the signature is weird." Camellia didn't even look up from her protein bar, which tasted like cardboard soaked in regret. "Weird how?" "Weird like military-grade encryption wrapped in civilian packaging. Weird like someone really doesn't want us to know what kind of ship that is. Weird like every single one of your bad decisions that got us shot at." "I've made plenty of good decisions," Camellia said, chewing thoughtfully. "Name one." "I haven't investigated that distress beacon yet." "Yet, being the operative word," Wren said. "You're going to do it anyway. You always do. You're like a moth, except the flame is usually attached to a missile." Camellia wadded up the protein bar wrapper and tossed it at the recycler, missing by a solid meter. "What's our ETA if we, hypothetically, went to take a look?" 43 minutes, and it's not hypothetical. You're already adjusting course. I can feel it in my circuits." She was, in fact, already adjusting course. Camellia had been running supply routes for 8 years, and in that time she'd learned that distress beacons meant 3 things: trouble, more trouble, or the kind of trouble that followed you home and ate your furniture. But she'd also learned that ignoring them meant lying awake at night wondering if someone died, because she couldn't be bothered to turn left. The weather vane banked gracefully, if you were generous with the word graceful, and Camellia settled in for the approach. 39 minutes later, because Camellia pushed the engines harder than recommended by anyone with an engineering certification, they dropped out of faster-than-light travel into what could only be described as a disaster with an identity crisis. The ship ahead was definitely not a research vessel. It was Nexari. "Oh, fantastic," Wren said, deadpan. "Apex predators. My favorite. Right up there with hull breaches and tax audits." The Nexari were the kind of species that made evolutionary biologists question their faith in natural selection. They stood nearly 9 feet tall, had 4 arms, claws that could shred titanium like tissue paper, and a predatory reputation that made other carnivorous species look like they nibbled salads for fun. Their empire controlled 16 systems, and they hadn't earned that territory by asking nicely. And this particular Nexari ship was dying. The hull was scorched black in the heat places, venting atmosphere from at least 6 breaches Camellia could see. The reactor signature was all wrong, fluctuating wildly, the kind of readings that usually preceded a very bright, very final explosion. "Life signs?" Camellia asked, already knowing she wasn't going to like the answer. "Weak, multiple, scattered throughout the ship, some fading fast." Wren paused, which was never good because AIs didn't need to pause. "Camellia, some of those life signs are small, very small." "How small?" "Child-sized. 38 of them, clustered in what looks like a reinforced section near the core." Camellia felt something cold settle in her stomach. "They have kids on a military vessel?" "Apparently so. And unless we do something monumentally stupid in the next 6 minutes, those kids are going to be atoms." She was already moving, hands flying over the controls, bringing the weather vane alongside the crippled Nexari ship. The docking protocols were a mess, the Nexari vessel's systems barely responsive. But Camilla had docked with worse. Once, she'd docked with a station that was actively on fire. This was only partially on fire, which felt like an improvement. "I'm giving us a 12% chance of survival," Wren offered helpfully. "That's up from your usual estimates." "I'm feeling optimistic. It's a new personality subroutine. I hate it." The docking clamps engaged with a shriek of protesting metal. Camilla grabbed her emergency kit, checked that her breather was functional, and headed for the airlock. The interface between ships was a nightmare of mismatched systems and emergency overrides, but eventually the door hissed open into a corridor that smelled like smoke, ozone, and something organic she didn't want to identify. The gravity was wrong, fluctuating. Emergency lighting cast everything in angry red. And somewhere ahead, Camilla could hear sounds that made her chest tight, the high-pitched keening of frightened children. She found the first body 20 meters in. A Nexari warrior, massive even in death, slumped against a wall with their claws still extended. The radiation burns were extensive. Camilla swallowed hard and kept moving. The reinforced section was exactly where Wren said it would be. The door was half open, jammed by debris. Through the gap, Camilla could see movement, small shapes, huddled together, eyes reflecting the emergency lights like gemstones. Cubs, 38 Nexari cubs, all under what looked like 5 years old in human terms, packed into a room that was rapidly running out of breathable air. "Wren," Camilla said quietly, "I need environmental stats on my suit. How long can I share my oxygen?" "Don't even think about it." "Stats, Wren." A long-suffering sigh, which was impressive for something without lungs. "With that many cubs? Maybe 20 minutes before you pass out. 30 before you die. That's not enough time to get them all back." "Then I'll move faster." Camilla started pulling debris away from the eye door, her muscles screaming with the effort. The cubs inside had noticed her now, pressing against the far wall, making sounds that were somewhere between hisses and whimpers. They were terrified, and she couldn't blame them. She was a strange alien trying to break into their shelter while their world literally fell apart around them. The door finally gave way enough for her to squeeze through. Inside, the cubs scattered like frightened shadows, clambering over each other to get away from her. They were beautiful in a way that would probably give her nightmares later. Sleek fur ranging from silver to deep black. Those 4 arms ending in retractable claws. Faces that were simultaneously feline and something entirely alien. One cub, bigger than the others with distinctive gray markings, positioned himself between Camilla and the group. His tiny claws were out, his spine ridge raised in a threat display that would have been adorable if it wasn't so heartbreaking. "Easy," Camilla said softly, holding up her hands. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to get you out." The cub, of course, didn't understand English. He hissed at her, a sound like steam escaping from a valve. Then something moved behind Camilla, and she spun to find another adult Nexari in the doorway. This one was alive, barely. The radiation burns covered half their body, and they were using the wall to stay upright. "You!" the Nexari rasped, their translator struggling with the damage. "Human?" "Yeah," Camilla said. "I got your distress call." The cubs. The Nexari's 4 arms trembled with the effort of staying conscious. "Pirates hit us. Reactor breach. Adults tried to contain it. But the radiation? We're all dead already." The cubs were in the shielded section, but life support is failing. You have to take them. "I'm working on it," Camilla said. "What's your name?" "Commander Felix." He coughed, a wet sound. Those cubs are the children of our finest warriors being transported to a colony world. If they die, 38 bloodlines end. Our fleet is searching, but they won't find us in time. How long do we have? The reactor will cascade in 8 minutes, maybe less. Fantastic, Camellia muttered. She turned back to the cubs, who were watching this exchange with wide eyes. The brave one with gray markings was still in his protective stance, but he looked uncertain now, glancing between Camellia and Felix. Felix said something in the Nexari language, a series of clicks and growls that made all the cubs go still. The gray-marked one, who Camellia was mentally calling Griff because he looked like a griff, slowly lowered his claws. "I told them you're here to help," Felix translated. "I told them to trust you." "Great. No pressure." Camellia moved slowly toward the cubs, trying to project calm while her heart hammered in her chest. "Ren, I need you to prep the cargo bay. Emergency life support. All of it. These kids are coming aboard." "The cargo bay isn't rated for that. Many life forms. Make it work." The cubs were starting to understand that something was happening, that this strange human was their only chance. One of the smallest ones, a female with silver fur Camellia immediately dubbed Millo, took a tentative step forward. Then another. Then she was pressed against Camellia's leg, making a sound that might have been a question. Camellia reached down slowly, and, when Millo didn't flinch, gently picked her up. The cub was heavier than she looked, all muscle and potential energy. She curled into Camellia's arms, and others started to follow. "Okay," Camellia said, gathering as many cubs as she could carry. "Everybody move, single file. We're getting off this ship." What followed was the longest 8 minutes of Camellia's life. She made 3 trips, carrying cubs in her arms and herding others ahead of her. They were scared, confused, some of them crying, but they followed. Griff took charge of the older cubs, keeping them together. The troublemaker she'd mentally named Ratch kept trying to run back to the Nexari ship, and she had to grab him twice. Felix stayed behind. He was too far gone, and they both knew it. But he kept talking to the cubs through Camellia's comm, keeping them calm, until his voice finally faded out. Camellia got the last cub, Millo, through the airlock just as Ren started the emergency undocking sequence. "Cutting it close," the AI said. "The reactor is going critical. We have 90 seconds. Then use them." The weather vane disengaged with all the grace of a drunk gymnast, thrusters firing at maximum, putting distance between them and the dying Nexari ship. Camellia stumbled into the cargo bay, which was now packed with 38 terrified alien children, and activated the emergency containment field just as the Nexari vessel behind them turned into a brief, bright star. The cubs pressed against the viewport, watching their ship, their crew, their escorts die in silent light. Some of them made sounds that needed no translation. Grief, pure and simple. Camellia sank to the floor, her legs finally giving out, and Millo immediately climbed into her lap. Then Griff joined her, leaning against her side. Then Ratch, and another, until she was surrounded by cubs who had just lost everything, and were clinging to the only solid thing they could find. "So," Ren said into the silence, "I'm detecting 38 life signs in the cargo bay. All stable. Life support is holding. And you, Captain, are covered in alien child drool." Camellia looked down. She was, in fact, covered in drool. Also claw marks, shed fur, and what she really hoped was just dirt. "Ren," she said quietly, "get me the nearest station. We need to report this and get these kids to proper care." "Already done. I've sent messages to 3 stations and the Nexari embassy. Though I should warn you, the station administrator is having what humans call a panic attack." "Why?" Because you're flying a cargo hauler, with 38 Nexari cubs aboard, and the Nexari battle fleet is currently tearing apart this entire sector looking for them. They think the cubs are dead. When they find out someone has them, they're going to respond with overwhelming force. Camellia looked at the cubs clustered around her. Griff had fallen asleep with his head on her shoulder. Millo was purring, a sound like distant thunder. Ratch was trying to eat her boot. "We'll figure it out," Camellia said, because what else could she say? "Famous last words," Wren replied. "I'm increasing our life insurance policy. Oh, wait, we don't have one, because no one will insure you." Outside the viewport, the stars streamed past, indifferent to the chaos of one small ship carrying the most precious and dangerous cargo in the known galaxy. This, Camellia thought, was going to be a problem. The thing about 38 traumatized alien children, Camellia discovered, was that they operated on instinct when their world fell apart, and Nexari instincts were decidedly predatory. The first 2 hours were what Wren diplomatically called a containment situation, and what Camellia less diplomatically called absolute chaos, wrapped in fur and claws. The cubs had processed their initial grief and moved directly into territorial panic mode. They'd formed 3 distinct clusters in the cargo bay, each one eyeing the others with suspicion. Griff had appointed himself leader of the largest group, puffing up his spine ridge and making little growling sounds whenever another cub got too close. Ratch had claimed the corner near the food dispensers and was actively hissing at anyone who approached. And poor Millo was stuck with a group of younger cubs who kept crying in these high-pitched warbles that made Camelia's teeth ache. "This is fine," Camellia muttered, standing in the doorway with a crate of emergency rations that she'd optimistically thought might help. "This is totally manageable." "You're lying to yourself," Wren observed. "Your heart rate suggests you're about to have what the medical database calls a significant emotional event." "I'm not having a significant emotional event." One of the cubs, a male with russet fur, launched himself at another cub over what appeared to be a dispute about a blanket. They rolled across the floor in a tangle of limbs and snarls, claws leaving scratches in the deck plating. "Right," Wren said. "No event at all." Camellia set down the crate and waded into the cargo bay. The cubs nearest to her immediately went still, watching her with those unsettling reflective eyes. She'd noticed that about them. They tracked movement like predators, always calculating angles and distances. "Okay, listen up," she said, knowing full well they couldn't understand her but needing to say it anyway. "I know today has been terrible. I know you're scared and confused, and you just watched your entire world explode. But if we're going to survive the next few days, we need some ground rules." Griff tilted his head at her, his ears swiveling forward. At least he was paying attention. "Rule 1, no eating each other. Rule 2, no eating me. Rule 3, no eating my ship." Ratch chose that exact moment to take a bite out of a power conduit. Sparks flew, and he jumped back with a startled yelp. "Case in point," Camellia said, moving to shoo him away from the damaged panel. "Wren, add that to the repair list." "The repair list is now 3 pages long. Most of it is claw marks. Some of it is bite marks. One entry is just labeled mystery stain." Camellia ignored her and focused on the immediate problem. 38 hungry, frightened children who probably hadn't eaten in hours. She opened the emergency rations crate and immediately realized her first mistake. The food was all human-standard protein blocks, nutrient paste, and vacuum-sealed vegetables. She had no idea what Nexari cubs ate, or if any of this would even be safe for them. Wren Pull up anything we have on Nexari dietary requirements. Pulling up nothing. We have nothing. The Nexari don't exactly publish their childcare manuals for public consumption. I can tell you they're obligate carnivores, which means those protein blocks might work. But I'm not putting odds on it. Better than nothing. Camellia opened one of the protein blocks and broke it into pieces. The nearest cubs immediately perked up, their noses twitching. Apparently, hunger overrode caution, because within seconds she was surrounded by chittering, reaching cubs who were trying to climb her legs to get at the food. Okay, one at a time. She tried to distribute pieces evenly, but it was like feeding a school of piranha. Cubs snatched food from her hands, from each other, from the floor. Griff tried to take more than his share, and Ratch literally climbed onto Camellia's shoulders to steal a piece from her hand. By the time the crate was empty, Camellia was exhausted, covered in even more scratches, and sitting on the floor with cubs sprawled around her in various states of satisfied food coma. Milo had claimed her lap again, purring that deep thunder sound. Griff was pressed against her left side, and somehow Ratch had ended up draped across her shoulders like the world's most dangerous scarf. "You're a natural," Wren said, managing to sound sarcastic even through genuine surprise. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "That's what makes it impressive." Camellia looked around the cargo bay, taking stock of the situation. The cubs needed more than just food. They needed bedding, proper temperature control, probably medical attention for the minor injuries she'd spotted. And they needed something she couldn't quantify: comfort, stability, the sense that someone was taking care of them. She'd never considered herself maternal. She'd spent most of her adult life in space, specifically to avoid commitments and complications. But looking at these cubs, orphaned and terrified, she felt something shift in her chest. "Right," she said, gently moving Milo aside and standing up. "We're going to make this work. Wren, what do we have that could function as bedding?" "Cargo blankets, emergency thermal sheets, and that ratty couch you keep saying you'll replace." "Perfect. Get creative." Over the next 3 hours, Camellia transformed the cargo bay into something resembling a functional nursery. She piled cargo blankets into nest-like structures, which the cubs immediately claimed and rearranged to their satisfaction. She adjusted the temperature up by 6 degrees because the cubs kept clustering together for warmth. She cleaned wounds with the medical kit, earning more scratches for her trouble, but preventing infections. The cubs watched her work with increasing curiosity. They started mimicking her movements, picking up small objects and carrying them around. When she hummed while arranging blankets, several of them made little chirping sounds in response, trying to copy the melody. Griff became her shadow, following her around the bay and occasionally trying to help by dragging blankets twice his size. Ratch tested every boundary she set, which she respected even as it drove her crazy. And Milo simply refused to be more than 3 feet away from her at any given moment. "Station response incoming," Wren announced suddenly. "You're going to want to hear this." The station administrator's voice came through, crackling with panic. "This is Port Langfield Station, to cargo vessel Weathervane. We received your report. Please confirm. You have 38 Nexari cubs aboard?" "Confirmed," Camellia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Rescued from a damaged military transport. All cubs are alive and stable." "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The administrator's voice went up an octave. "The Nexari battle fleet has been searching for those cubs for 6 hours. They think they're dead. They've already threatened 3 stations with military action for not providing information. If they find out you have them..." "They'll what?" "I saved these kids. I'm not the enemy here." "You're a human in a cargo ship with the children of their most elite warriors. They're not going to stop and ask questions. They're going to see a threat and eliminate it. Camilla felt cold. How long until they reach this sector? Best estimate? 18 hours. Maybe less if they push their drives. Then we have 18 hours to figure this out. She cut the connection and looked down at the cubs. Griff had fallen asleep against her leg. Milo was making a nest out of Camilla's jacket. Ratch was trying to fit his entire head into an empty food container. Ren, Camilla said quietly, if the Nexari fleet shows up, what are our options? Run, hide, or pray? Possibly all three simultaneously. A Nexari battle fleet consists of approximately 200 warships, each capable of reducing us to component atoms. Our shields would last maybe 8 seconds, 9 if we're lucky. So we can't fight. We can't even make them pause. Camilla sat down on her ratty couch, and immediately 6 cubs climbed up to join her. They curled around her like living blankets, warm and trusting, and completely unaware that she had no idea how to save them. Then we don't fight, she said finally. When they get here, we talk. Talk, Ren repeated. To a fleet that thinks you kidnapped their children. That should go well. You have a better idea? Several, actually. They all involve abandoning the cubs and fleeing to another galaxy. Not happening. Didn't think so. Ren paused. For what it's worth, I calculate a 4% chance of successful negotiation. 4% is better than 0. Outside the viewport, space looked peaceful and empty. But somewhere out there, 200 warships were hunting, searching for their lost cubs with the kind of determination that made stars nervous. Camilla pulled Milo closer and tried not to think about the math. 16 hours later, Camilla was teaching a group of Nexari cubs how to play a clapping game when the proximity alarms started screaming. Well, Ren said with the cheerfulness of someone about to witness a spectacular disaster, they're early. I'm detecting multiple faster-than-light signatures. Lots of them. So many, in fact, that I'm going to need to adjust my counting algorithms. Camilla felt her stomach drop. She'd been hoping for more time, maybe a chance to rehearse what she'd say, to figure out how to explain that she wasn't a kidnapper or a threat. Instead, she got 16 hours of playing nursemaid and exactly 0 minutes to prepare for her imminent destruction. The cubs sensed her tension immediately. Griff stood up from where he'd been napping, his spine ridge rising. Milo pressed closer to Camilla's side, making worried chirping sounds. Ratch, who'd been attempting to dismantle a storage locker, froze mid-mischief. How many ships? Camilla asked, already moving toward the bridge. Counting now. 50, 90, 120. Still coming. They're dropping out of faster than light in perfect formation, which is either very impressive or very terrifying. Possibly both. Camilla reached the bridge and dropped into her captain's chair. The view screen showed what her nightmares would look like if they had a military budget. 200 Nexari warships, each one bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon, arranged in a sphere around her tiny cargo hauler. They were surrounded. Completely, utterly, mathematically surrounded. Well, Camilla said, her voice surprisingly steady. At least they're thorough. They're locking weapons, Ren reported. All of them, every single ship. I'm detecting enough targeting lasers pointed at us to vaporize a small asteroid field. This is either overkill or a very emphatic statement. How long before they fire? Unknown. They're not hailing us. They're not communicating at all. They're just sitting there, locked and loaded, waiting for something. Camilla's hands hovered over the controls. She could run, theoretically, but her ship would make it approximately 3 seconds before becoming an expanding cloud of debris. She could hide, except there was nowhere to hide when you were in the center of a sphere made of warships. She could surrender, but to whom and how when they weren't even talking to her? Behind her, she heard the patter of many small feet. The cubs had followed her to the bridge, clustering in the doorway, watching with wide eyes. Griff pushed forward to stand beside her chair, his small clawed hand reaching up to grip the armrest. "I know, buddy," Camellia said softly. "I'm scared, too." Her console blinked with an incoming hail attempt, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Wren, is that them?" "Negative. That's actually Port Langfield Station. They're probably calling to say goodbye and possibly apologize for any inconvenience." Camellia ignored the hail. She stared at the view screen, at the 200 ships that held her life in their targeting computers, and made a decision that was either brilliant or the stupidest thing she'd ever done. "Wren, open a wideband communication channel. Every ship in that fleet. Audio and visual. You want to talk to all of them at once? I want them to see what they're about to shoot at. That's either genius or suicide, possibly both. Opening channel." The console lit up with connection indicators. 200 active links, 200 warships, now receiving her transmission. Camellia took a breath, tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking, and opened her mouth to speak. She never got the chance. Griff, curious about the lights and sounds, toddles forward to get a better look at the console. He saw Camellia sitting there, saw the screen filled with adult Nexari warriors in their combat armor, and his little face lit up with recognition. These were his people, his species, the kind of adults who were supposed to protect him. He reached up, wanting to be held, wanting comfort, and said in clear Nexari, "Mama?" The word hung in the air like a dropped bomb. Camellia froze. The universal translator caught it, displayed it on her screen, made sure she understood exactly what this cub had just called her. Mama. Mother. The most important word in any language. Then the floodgates opened. Milo pushed forward, seeing the screen, seeing the warriors, and called out, "Mama!" She pointed at Camellia, making sure the warriors understood who she meant. Ratch joined in, his voice higher-pitched. "Mama! Mama!" Then all 38 cubs were crowding onto the bridge, pushing into frame of the visual transmission, climbing over each other to be seen. They were pointing at Camellia, tugging at her clothes, calling her mama in their chittering voices. They weren't scared of the fleet. They were excited. They wanted to show off their new parent to their own kind, the way children everywhere wanted to share important news. Camellia sat, paralyzed in her chair, covered in cubs, while 200 warships watched in what she could only assume was complete shock. The silence stretched. Seconds became minutes. Camellia could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Griff's small body pressed against her side, could smell the cub's fur and the recycled air, and her own fierce sweat. Then the communication channel crackled to life. Not with threats, not with weapons fire, with something Camellia never expected to hear from a Nexari battle fleet: crying. It started with one voice, choked and broken, then another, then dozens, hundreds, the sound cascading through the open channel like a wave. These warriors, these apex predators who controlled 16 systems through military might, were weeping. The main view screen shifted, focusing on a single ship, the largest one, right at the center of the formation. A figure appeared on screen, a Nexari male so massive he made Felix look small, covered in scars that spoke of a lifetime of combat. His armor bore markings that Camelia's translator helpfully identified as Fleet Admiral. His name was Morax, and he was crying like his heart was breaking. "The cubs," he said, his voice raw. "They're alive. They're all alive." "Yes," Camilla managed, her own voice shaking. "All 38. They're healthy, they're fed, they're safe." Morax stared at the screen, at the cubs climbing all over Camilla, at Griff, who was now proudly showing off a toy Camilla had improvised from spare parts. The Admiral's 4 arms were trembling. "We thought they were dead. The ship's reactor signature vanished 6 hours ago. We searched the debris field and found nothing. We thought we'd failed them." "You didn't fail. I picked up the distress call. Commander Felix got them into a shielded section before the reactor went critical. He stayed behind so they could escape." "Felix was a good warrior," Morax said quietly. "He died with honor. He died saving these kids. That's more than honor." The Admiral looked at her properly then, seeming to really see her for the first time. A human cargo hauler pilot, covered in claw marks and shed fur and what was definitely cub drool, sitting in the captain's chair of a ship that was held together mostly by hope and questionable welding. "You saved them," he said. "You flew into a dying ship to rescue children that weren't your species, weren't your responsibility. You could have left them." "No," Camilla said simply. "I couldn't have." Morax made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been another sob. Other faces appeared on the split-screen communication. Warriors from different ships, all watching, all crying. Some of them were calling out names, children they recognized, bloodlines they thought had ended. "Those cubs," Morax said, "are the children of our finest warriors, our elite units. We were transporting them to a colony world where they would be raised and trained. When we lost the transport ship, we lost our future, our bloodlines, our hope." Camilla looked down at Griff, who was now trying to help Milo climb onto the console. "They're right here. They're safe. We just need to arrange transfer—" "No," Morax interrupted. "No transfer." Camilla felt cold again. "What do you mean?" "I mean those cubs have chosen you. They call you Mama. In Nexari culture, that bond is sacred. You saved them. You cared for them. You earned their trust. They are yours now, if you'll have them." What? I can't. I'm a cargo hauler. I don't know anything about raising kids, especially not Nexari kids. I've been making this up as I go for the past 16 hours. And yet, they're healthy, happy, and calling you Mama. Morax's expression softened. "You've done more than survive, human. You've given them hope." The fleet was standing down. Camilla could see it on her sensors. Weapons powering offline, targeting locks disengaging. 200 warships, no longer poised to fire, just floating there in a protective sphere around her tiny cargo hauler. "I have a proposition," Morax said. Camilla was almost afraid to ask. "What kind of proposition?" "Help us transport these cubs to their colony world, under our protection, with full honors. And when we arrive, we'll discuss your future. Whether you keep the cubs or not, you've earned a place among the Nexari. We don't forget our debts." Camilla looked around her bridge, at the cubs playing with her controls, at Griff standing proud beside her chair, at Milo purring in her lap, at her ship, battered and scarred and somehow still flying. "Ren," she said, "thoughts?" "I'm detecting a job offer with benefits, protection, and possible adoption papers. My analysis suggests this is superior to being vaporized." "That's what I thought." Camilla looked back at Morax. "Okay, we'll escort them home." The Admiral smiled, showing teeth that could tear through armor plating. "Then, welcome to the fleet, mother of cubs." The Nexari battle fleet didn't just escort the weather vane to the colony world. They threw what Camilla could only describe as a mobile parade, complete with honor guards, ceremonial formations, and enough military pageantry to make a planetary government jealous. "This is excessive," Camellia muttered, watching through the viewport as 6 destroyers performed a synchronized barrel roll in her honor. "This is so excessive it's looped back around to absurd." "Enjoy it," Wren said. "It's not every day you get 200 warships treating you like royalty. Actually, scratch that. It's not any day. This is literally unprecedented in human Nexari relations." Griff was pressed against the viewport, watching the display with wide eyes. He kept pointing at different ships and making excited chittering sounds. Millo had claimed Camellia's lap as her permanent residence, purring contentedly. Ratch was attempting to gnaw on a datapad, which Camellia gently removed for the 3rd time that hour. The past 18 hours had been surreal. The fleet had sent over supplies, proper Nexari cub food, medical scanners, even toys and educational materials. A delegation of warriors had visited the weather vane, ostensibly to check on the cubs, but really to see the human who'd achieved the impossible. They'd stood in her cargo bay, these massive predators, and watched with fascination as Camellia broke up a dispute over a toy and convinced Ratch to stop trying to eat the wall panels. One warrior, a female named Nexari, had stayed longer than the others. She'd watched Camellia work with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been disbelief. "You have no training," Nexari had said, more statement than question. "None whatsoever," Camellia confirmed, wiping cub drool off her shirt. "I'm making this up as I go. Is it that obvious?" "It's obvious that you care. That's more important than training." Nexari had knelt down, allowing several cubs to climb onto her shoulders. "Our species values strength above all things. But you've shown us another kind of strength, the kind that flies into danger for children that aren't yours. That's warrior spirit, even if you've never held a weapon." Now, approaching the colony world, Camellia felt the weight of what was about to happen. She'd agreed to bring the cubs home, but nobody had actually discussed what came next. Did they expect her to just hand them over and leave? Did they expect her to stay? Did she want to stay? "Incoming transmission from Admiral Morax," Wren announced. "He wants to discuss landing procedures and, quote, other important matters." Camellia accepted the hail. Morax appeared on screen, looking slightly less overwhelmed than their first conversation, but still wearing an expression that suggested he'd been crying recently. "We're approaching the colony," he said. "The families are waiting. They know their cubs survived. They know a human saved them. There's going to be a ceremony." "I don't need a ceremony," Camellia said quickly. "I just want to make sure the cubs are okay." "The ceremony isn't negotiable. You saved 38 bloodlines. Every family wants to thank you personally." Morax paused, his expression shifting to something more serious. "But there's something we need to discuss first. The cubs, specifically, their custody." Camellia felt her chest tighten. "What about it?" "The Nexari government has prepared adoption papers. All 38 cubs, formally transferred to your care, if you choose to accept. Full legal guardianship, with all rights and responsibilities." The datapad in Camelia's hands suddenly felt very heavy. "You're serious?" "Completely. The cubs have bonded with you. Forcing them away would be traumatic. And frankly, watching you with them, we believe you'd be an excellent parent." Morax leaned forward. "But we're not asking you to do this alone. Accept the adoption, and you'll receive full support. Financial, medical, educational. A new ship, proper quarters on the colony, anything you need. We take care of our own, and you're one of us now." "I don't know the first thing about Nexari culture," I'd probably mess up constantly. You'll learn. We'll teach you. That's what families do. Camilla looked around her bridge. At Griff, who'd appointed himself her personal bodyguard. At Milo, who refused to sleep anywhere except pressed against Camilla's side. At Ratch, who'd stopped being a troublemaker and started being her little shadow, copying her movements and trying to help with everything. 38 cubs. 38 children who'd lost everything and somehow decided she was worth trusting. "Can I think about it?" she asked quietly. "Take all the time you need. The papers will be waiting when you're ready." The colony world was beautiful. Rolling plains of violet grass, crystal formations that caught the sunlight, and a settlement that managed to blend Nexari military efficiency with something softer, something that looked like home. The landing pad was crowded. Families waited, warriors and civilians alike, all watching as the weather vane touched down with the grace of a drunken meteor. The moment the ramp lowered, the cubs went wild. They recognized the landscape, the smells, the promise of familiar ground. But they didn't run. They waited, looking at Camilla for permission. "Go on," she said softly. "Your families are waiting." Griff hesitated, torn between the pull of home and his new attachment to Camilla. She knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. "It's okay. I'm not leaving yet. We'll figure this out together." That was all he needed. Griff bounded down the ramp, and the others followed in a flood of fur and excited chittering. Families rushed forward, scooping up cubs, crying and laughing and holding them like they'd never let go. Camilla stood at the top of the ramp, watching reunions, and felt something break loose in her chest. Relief, maybe. Or grief for the weight she'd been carrying. Or joy that these children were home and safe. A small tug on her pant leg made her look down. Milo hadn't joined the others. She stood there, looking up at Camilla with those reflective eyes, and made a questioning sound. "You want to stay with me?" Camilla asked. Milo chirped an affirmative and held up her 4 arms to be picked up. Camilla lifted her, and Milo immediately curled into her shoulder, purring that deep thunder sound. Then Griff was running back up the ramp, refusing to leave even with his family calling. Ratch followed, then 3 others, then more. By the time Admiral Morax reached the weather vane, 12 cubs had firmly planted themselves around Camilla, making it absolutely clear they weren't going anywhere without her. "Well," Morax said, looking at the scene with obvious amusement, "I think that answers the custody question." 12 cubs, Camilla said, slightly dazed. "That's still 12 cubs. Could be worse. Could be 38. Could be 0, Wren interjected, helpfully. "But apparently, we're collecting children now. I'm going to need to update my programming to include nursery rhymes." The ceremony was overwhelming. Speeches about honor and sacrifice, gifts from grateful families, formal declarations that made Camilla blush. But the moment that mattered came later, in a quiet office, when she pressed her thumb to a datapad and legally became the guardian of 12 Nexari cubs. "You're insane," Wren said as they walked back to their new quarters, surrounded by cubs. "You know that, right?" "Completely," Camilla agreed. Griff held her hand, Milo rode on her shoulders, and Ratch was already investigating their new home for things to take apart. "But look at them." "I am looking. I'm seeing 12 small predators who are going to turn our lives upside down." "Yeah." Camilla smiled, watching Griff proudly show the others where their sleeping nests would be. "But they're our small predators." Outside, the Nexari battle fleet maintained orbit, standing guard over the colony. 200 warships, protecting one human who'd done the impossible. She'd flown into danger for children that weren't hers, and somewhere along the way, they'd become hers anyway. Camilla looked at the adoption papers in her hand, at the cubs already making themselves at home, and laughed until she nearly cried. "Welcome to your new life," Wren said. "Could be worse," Camilla replied. "Could be better. Could be lonely." She watched Milo and Griff curl up together in a nest of blankets. But it's not. And really, that was all that mattered.